What's up, guys? Your agent Tyler Wayrung here, and today we're going to talk about all things net worth. We're going to talk about first what the heck even is net worth, why it's important to track it, and I'm going to walk you guys through exactly how I go about tracking this on a monthly basis, and I'll even leave a bonus for you at the very end. But we're going to walk through different scenarios, kind of how to set it up, how to walk through it, keep it updated, and track it. So with that, let's go ahead and jump in. All right, first off, let's talk about what net worth actually is. So at a high level, it's everything you own minus everything that you owe on the things you own, and whatever that amount left over is what your net worth is. So I'm sure you've heard about these these big names like Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates are worth hundreds of billions of dollars. And that means if they sold everything and paid off all the debts they have associated to those assets, then that would be the amount that's left over. So that's how all folks go about tracking net worth. And so let's jump into the actual spreadsheet that I use to track it. It's a slightly simplified version, but it'll kind of explain this concept in a deeper term. So let's take a look at that now. All right, so you'll see here, this is a typical net worth statement where you have one column for all of your assets, another column for all of your liabilities, typically ones that are associated to that asset, and we'll look at that in just a second. And then you take the total of all of your assets minus the total of your liabilities, and you end up with a net worth at the end of the day. So let's talk about what that looks like. Or let's set up a sample net worth statement here. So if we look at bank accounts, and these are just examples, you can go and plug, all the different ones in that make sense to you or that are applicable to your life. But let's just say in a bank account, let's say we have $5,000 here. There's no liability tied to a bank account, so that would be a zero. Let's say you owe 10 grand in student loans. You have a car. So a car is a good example of an asset that's worth value if you were to sell it. And then a car typically, for a lot of people, has a liability tied to it in the form of a car note. Okay, so let's just say that you have a vehicle worth $10,000 and you have $5,000 worth of loans associated to that car. So this is typically how you associate those in on the same line item there. So personal property, these are things like that you have in your house. So like furniture, jewelry, art, anything you have that, if you sold it all, I typically don't get too caught up on this line item because it's very subjective, and quite frankly, it'd be very difficult to liquidate all of the kind of things just laying around your house. So let's just keep this one simple, $5,000. Let's say you have $10,000 stock account, 401k, let's say $20,000, and then real estate. Let's call it your primary residence. So this is current market value in the asset side. So let's say you bought this house for $200,000, but in the last couple of years, real estate has shot up. So let's call it $250,000, and you bought it for $200,000, and now you've paid the loan down to $190,000. Okay, so you'll see in the same example as a car, this liability is tied to this asset in the same line item, okay? So you'll see this is an example of a relatively simple net worth statement. And so how do we get these numbers, right? So bank accounts, very simple. You know exactly what's in your bank accounts, but for vehicles and real estate. So these are the most common questions I get. So on vehicles, you can go out to Kelley Blue Book. You can type in your vehicle's make, model, and they'll give you kind of what the trade-in value of that is. So that's usually the number that I use to plug in for vehicles. And then for real estate, I don't get caught up in the exacts. So I like to just pull Zillow's figures here. You can use a tool called mint.com, mint.com. You can load all this in and just refresh it monthly or quarterly, so you don't have to go out and search on all these items. But this, in a nutshell, is how you come up with your net worth. All right, so now let's talk about why net worth is really important and why should you even be figuring all this out. So for starters, this is just very good information to have on hand. It's a good, financial health check. If you have a negative net worth, that's probably something you want to be aware of. And this is the sum of all of your assets minus all of your liabilities. So in theory, you want this number to be growing. And how do you know if it's growing or not if this is not something you're checking regularly? So I recommend updating this and keeping a pulse on it on a quarterly basis. A quarterly time frame doesn't give too much time for things to get completely out of whack. And it also is enough time to where it's not such a pain to keep it on top of all these numbers. So every month you can set reminders in your phone. So at the end of every quarter, you go through here, you spend 30 minutes kind of checking in on all your accounts, all your mortgages and things like that. And you go through here, update this, and you have a good snapshot. The other reason that it's important to track this is very cool to go and look back upon. I think humans naturally are motivated by progress. And when you go back and look at how you've done or how far you've come from where you started, it motivates you to do even better looking forward. It allows you to set goals based on projections. All right, if you're growing your net worth by 10% every quarter and you start to tweak off of that, you kind of get in the mindset of how can I get this back on track, right? So I have about 5 years of net worth tracking, and it's very cool to see how it's grown from 5 years ago. And also, lastly, the other big point on tracking is you'll see spikes and dips, throughout the quarters once you start to track this for a relatively good amount of time. And you want to start to notice what things that you're doing during the times of spikes and during the times of dips. So you can either avoid the things that you're doing that typically make your net worth dip and do more of the things that make your net worth spike. All right. So sometimes markets just help you out, like we're in right now. If you own a lot of real estate, you've probably been climbing for quite some time. So I've just continued to buy real estate. All right. So that's just one example. I noticed that every time I buy a property, because I typically buy under value and increase the value, my net worth takes a good jump every time I do that, and especially when I BRRRR back out of it. All right, so let's take a look at a BRRRR, for example, and how that can impact your net worth and how the money moves back and forth between the asset and liability side throughout the BRRRR cycle. All right, so in this example, we're going to assume that we have $20,000 in our bank account. In a HELOC, we just have, this is a notes section here. This is just a $50K HELOC, so it doesn't actually show up as an asset or a liability until it's actually used. So in this example, let's pretend that we're going to buy a piece of real estate with this HELOC. We're going to pull out $50,000 into a form of credit that we can write checks against, or we can basically wire money from this fund. So in this example, as soon as I wire money out of that account, it becomes a liability. So I owe that money back to the bank that I pulled it from. So now, as soon as you do that, it becomes a liability. So I have a $50,000 liability on this side, but as soon as I put it into my account, it takes this to $75,000. Because we impacted both sides equally, there's currently no change to net worth. We started out with $25,000. All right, so now we're going to buy a piece of real estate that they're asking $60,000 for. We're going to assume that we can buy it for $50,000 because we're going to be able to pay cash for that. So here's what that looks like. All right, so now we're going to move this $50,000 out of our account. We're going to wire that to the title company, and now we're going to become the owners of a $60,000 piece of real estate. This moves back down to $25,000. So you'll see we've gained $10,000 in net worth just by purchasing a property under value. Okay, so now we own this piece of real estate, and now we're going to put $20,000 into it. So let's just assume through, after we bought it, we're going to rehab it. Let's say we're going to use $20,000 to rehab it. So we've used that $20,000, we put it into the property. And after we rehab it, we find out that the property is now worth $120,000. Terrible with the zeros today. So it's worth $120,000. So you see our net worth went up a good chunk here, but all that is still sitting in the asset column, and we still owe that $50,000 on our HELOC. So here's where the magic of a BRRRR comes into play when you actually go through the refinance. All right, we're going to use the example an 80% loan to value cash out refinance. So we have the value here is now 120, and now we're going to cash out refinance that at 80%. So if we look at equals times 0.8, so that means we can get a $96,000 loan on this piece of real estate. So actually that moves right here. All right, and that $96,000 attaches on that same line item. So now we own a piece of real estate for $120, and we have a liability attached to it for $96,000. All right, but since we didn't owe anything on that real estate, the bank actually gives us that check for $96,000. So we put that back into our account here. So 96 plus 5, 101,000. but we still have this HELOC hanging out here. All right, so now we'll take this $50,000 out of our bank account to pay off that HELOC. So what that looks like, so then we have that here. That gets rid of that liability. So this is the power of the BRRRR model. We started out with a $25,000 net worth, and now we're leaving with a $75,000 net worth, and let's see how much equity we have here. So we have $24,000 of equity in this property. We're only going to do this if it cash flows at the end of the day. So now we have a $24,000 equity position. We're getting monthly cash flow, and we have returned money into our bank account and increased our net worth by $50,000. So obviously this is a very simple example where all the numbers check out, but I just wanted to give you the idea of how the money flows from your asset to your liability column and how this can improve your net worth. All right, and since you stuck around to the end, I did promise that I would leave you with something. All right, so for the folks who are just getting started with tracking their net worth and trying to figure this out, I'm going to give you this exact spreadsheet I'm using that has some very simple calculations in there. And then I'm also going to give you my tracking sheet over here. So this is exactly what I do. Let's just assume here, $10,000, 15. Oh, 150. Let's call it 200. Somebody's getting after it. Oh, let's give them 200. So anyway, you get the idea. So this is the sheet I use every quarter to come in and track, and I like to see a visual. So that's why I use this visual reference here. So I'm gonna go ahead and give you that. I'll drop a link in the comments below with this spreadsheet in there. If you just wanna get started, and it's just Excel, you can add to this and start to build out upon it. That's what I've done over the years to come up with a relatively complex formula that really just gives me some good indicators on it. But this is a very simple concept, and if you're just getting started with tracking your net worth, it's a great place to start. So guys, I hope this was helpful just to give you an idea of what net worth is, what it is when they say that Jeff Bezos is worth 165 trillion, whatever he's worth now. At least you understand how much he probably has as an asset in his asset column versus what he has in his liability column, and what they can now say that you're worth now that you're able to go out and track this on your own. So if you are committing to start to track your net worth, drop a comment below and say, I'm committing to doing this, and let the universe know. That'll help keep you accountable. And guys, I swear you will thank me later when you start to do this for several months in a row and you have something to look back upon from where you started and from where you're going to be, and I'm sure that will be quite the achievement. So with that, guys, we'll go ahead and wrap. I'm Tyler BRRRR, and we'll catch you next time.